Today in class, hopefully you learned about money. If you didn't finish in the class, hopefully you're finishing it up for homework. Now, we talked about money and its value. Our money system is based on a fiat money system, and that's generally money that is considered useless and is not connected or associated with any commodity. It has its value because we believe it has value. And our money is a fiat money system which is used for a medium of exchange in which we purchase goods and services. Our money system used to be based on gold, but that ended in 1971 when President Nixon ended our gold standard. Now, our money is valuable because it's limited in its supply and people want it. A demand for it exists. Now, this money system is always going to work, and it's always going to maintain our money's value because we believe that money will have value all the way into the future. Our money is based on a system of supply and demand. We've discussed supply and demand in the class. Now, our money functions under this principle because when the supply of money is limited, the demand for it is high. When the demand for something is high, its value is also going to be high. So when we have a smaller circulation of money, we have a higher value of money and our purchasing power is increased. Now, if we have too much money in circulation, inflation is going to occur. And inflation is the rate in which the general level of prices for goods and services rises. And then our purchasing power, therefore, is going to be diminished. So when inflation occurs, things are going to be more expensive and the value of our money is going to be decreased. It is not worth as much. Look at the example at the bottom for a better understanding. Now, the Federal Reserve are the group of people and the organization who controls our monetary supply and our money for our country. The Federal Reserve is the central bank of the United States. When people need money, we turn to banks to get more money. When the country or businesses need money, they turn to the Federal Reserve. Now, the Federal Reserve is a group of individuals who consist and make up a board in which they oversee and determine our country's money supply and how much money is actually in circulation. This is just a quick overview of what that Board of Governors does. Within the Federal Reserve, there's a Federal Open Market Committee, and this committee is important because they make decisions that affect the economy and they control our money supply. The Federal Reserve is divided into 12 Federal Reserve districts. That means each state is allocated to a specific Federal Reserve bank. Now, the Federal Reserve has two functions. It regulates our money supply and it acts as the government's bank. Acting as the government's bank is the most important thing I think we're going to look at for the remainder of this video. The Federal Reserve houses the government's money. All tax revenue and all revenue in general is deposited into the Federal Reserve for the country to use. The Federal Reserve sells government bonds and treasury bills, which we can use to borrow money. And then the Federal Reserve manages our currency and lets us know how much money is in circulation, and it lets all the other organizations know how much money to put out there and how much money to make. Now, the most important thing they do is they control the monetary policy. Monetary policy is controlling the supply of money and the cost of borrowing money from a bank. Now, the Fed can increase or decrease the supply of money that we have. They can do this by raising and lowering the discount rate, raising and lowering the reserve requirement for member banks, and buying and selling government bonds. I know that didn't make sense, but I want you to think about it by looking at these two words, discount rate and reserve requirement. Now, the discount rate is the rate in which the Federal Reserve is going to charge a member bank to borrow money. Remember, when banks need money, they turn to the Federal Reserve to borrow money from, just like a citizen or a consumer would turn to their commercial bank to borrow money when they need it. The next thing in which they control, or the next way in which they control the monetary supply is by controlling the reserve requirement. Each bank is going to have a reserve requirement, which means they must keep a certain amount of money on hand and they can't lend it out in order to make more money. So a bank must keep a certain amount on hand. So if the Federal Reserve increases the reserve requirement, that means banks must keep more money within their banks and they can't loan it out, which means banks will house more money and consumers would not have access to that money and they couldn't get as many loans. Now, the interest rates is another thing that the Federal Reserve controls. These are the rates that influence business investments and consumer spending. When the Fed raises and lowers these rates, it also contributes to the increase or decrease in supply of money. Now, two men who have figured in dramatically and had a huge influence on the Federal Reserve in your time has been Alan Greenspan, who was the outgoing chairman, and Ben Bernanke, who oversaw our financial crisis of 2008 and is currently overseeing the recession movements and trying to improve and steady our economy. Now, for tonight, for homework, or just to get prepared for tomorrow, I want you to look at how do these three actions impact the economy: raising and lowering the discount rate, raising and lowering the reserve requirement, and buying and selling government bonds. That's it for tonight. Thanks.